We talked to prominent Rules Committee member of the RNC, Morton Blackwell, last week, but he and none of the other Republican insiders will talk about the details of the off-the-record meetings that were held recently about the rules of the GOP convention this summer. Party insiders are reportedly fighting over how to structure the convention and how to prevent Donald Trump from being the nominee, and a rule known as Rule 40B. Take a look.
I was a member of the Rules Committee representing Virginia at the 2012 convention in Cleveland, and the rules that were in effect as we arrived in Cleveland was that a candidate's name could be placed in nomination if the candidate could demonstrate proof of a plurality of the delegates in 5 states. The Romney people decided to use the power that they had as the presumptive nominee to pass a large number of amendments through the Convention Rules Committee, and one of them was to increase the threshold from a plurality of 5 states to a majority of 8 states.
Joining me now is Chairman of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp. Matt, good to see you.
Great to be with you, Liz.
All right, Matt, first of all, do you expect a brokered or contested convention, or is all this talk just part of the political fray?
No, I think, Liz, it's a real open question. I think that there's a decent chance that the convention will be unresolved as delegates head toward Cleveland. So there's a chance that Donald Trump will not have the minimum number of delegates heading into the convention.
All right, we heard a couple weeks ago a video from a Rules Committee member about people's votes, our votes, Republicans who voted in the primary, our votes not counting, essentially, that we didn't choose the nominee. We don't choose the nominee for president. The party does. Matt, is that accurate?
No, it's not. And the fact is this, these delegates, almost every delegate will be bound to vote for the person who won that state in whatever proportion that the state rules allow for from that state. So, for instance, in a state like New Hampshire that Trump won, by the clear majority of those delegates will be bound to vote for Donald Trump. So where it gets a little interesting, Liz, is does it go beyond that first ballot? Does Donald Trump have the minimum number of delegates? As he doesn't, more and more of these delegates become unbound, which means they don't have to vote for the person who won the primary in the state. Then it's going to get interesting if we get there.
All right, let's talk about unbound versus bound, because like you said, it gets confusing. It gets very in-depth in the rules. And one of the rules that's been the most controversial that's been talked about recently is called Rule 40B. We heard Morton Blackwell talking about that in the video at the beginning of the segment. That requires any candidate, anybody who wants to get the nomination, to have 8 states, have a majority of votes in 8 states in order to be eligible for the nomination. And I want to ask you about this, because how does this affect bound versus unbound delegates? Because if a candidate does not meet that 8-state threshold, what happens to the delegates that were previously bound to them?
Oh, that's a great and even more complicated question. But Morton Blackwell is a member of my board at the American Conservative Union. He's a very long-standing member of the National Committee, and I think he's got it right. The Romney people were worried that the Ron Paul people would be able to put Ron Paul's name into question on that very first ballot. So it would have provided for a little more of a raucous convention. Liz, here's the rule about Republicans. We like our conventions to be boring, to follow a script, and to have nothing out of the ordinary. And that makes for terrible television, and it actually means that the numbers of people watching the convention go down. And what we're going to have this time is a convention, hopefully, that really we live in the political moment, which I think will make better television and give us a chance to reach more people. So what happens to these unbound delegates? It really depends on the rules of each particular state. And those rules are kind of, the states are walking through that process now. You have candidates like Marco Rubio saying they're not going to release their delegates, which means he wants them to be bound to him on that first vote, which means they wouldn't be able to either vote for Trump or Cruz if those were the 2 names in consideration on the first ballot.
Okay, well, surely all this drama isn't just for television. That would be taking it a bit too far, in my opinion. But I didn't know that Marco Rubio was allowed to hold on to his delegates like that. And let me ask you a hypothetical question then. This is just for my own clarification,
Sure.
for our viewers' clarification. If we get to the convention
Yes.
and all three candidates that are currently in the race are still in the race, Trump, Cruz, and Kasich for example, does not have that 8-state threshold, what happens to his delegates on that first vote?
Okay, so what it basically means is on that first vote, the only names that will be in consideration will be those candidates that get to the 8 states. And right now there's only 2 candidates, as you correctly say, Trump and Cruz, that will actually be in consideration on that very first round of votes. And therefore, those are the only 2 people that can actually possibly get the nomination. So will other delegates be able to vote for Rubio and that? Yes, but it won't matter because the only 2 people who actually have names in nomination and who will actually be tallied will be either Trump or Cruz.
Is that only for the first vote, or does that open up if it's not a clear-cut winner
Yes.
after that first vote?
Well, it's 2 things. Number one, there are going to be some delegates on the very first round who won't be bound. For instance, the delegates, I believe, from North Dakota, which is where that committee man was you referenced earlier in this segment, and others as well. So there will be some delegates who will be unbound from the beginning, but the vast majority will be bound. But on the second vote, more of them become unbound. And as votes continue, even more become unbound. So you get to the point where the delegate actually has the ability to vote for the candidate that he or she prefers, regardless of what happened with the popular vote in their state, which I think is what concerns a lot of people, quite frankly.
Right, and let me clarify this just one more time. So they become unbound in their ability to vote for a particular candidate, but the rule as it's stated right now doesn't allow even those votes, those delegates, to be counted unless the threshold is met. So that second vote, are these unbound delegates still tied to that rule in the sense that they can vote for whoever they want, but only 2 candidates are even eligible for their votes?
That's exactly right. So go back to this Rule 40B, which was changed by the Romney folks. The only candidates who will have the chance to get the nomination are those who meet that minimum threshold. And what the Romney folks changed it to be is the majority. You have to have a majority of the delegates in 8 states. It's a it sounds like a low threshold. It's historically a very high threshold. And I think what people like Morton Blackwell would like to see us do is go back and lower that threshold so that more names can be considered. Not because he's trying to make it harder for either Trump or Cruz to get the nomination. Morton actually supports Ted Cruz. It's because a lot of us Republicans believe that there's nothing wrong with having a more open process and allowing delegates who are bound to somebody like a Marco Rubio or a Carly Fiorina or a Jeb Bush or whoever else has competed the potential to get to that minimum threshold and have a real vote on the convention floor. You're right. I don't want to be too cynical. It's not just about television, but what television and the other medium gives the voter is a chance to really see inside the party, to see how the process works. And we need to be transparent, and we need to have a process that is seen as open and correct.
All right, so Morton Blackwell proposed a change to that rule, to Rule 40B in January. Reince nixed that. He said no. It initially was going to be adopted. Then they had a second round of voting. It was nixed. Up until what time can the rules be changed? Are people still trying to change them?
So here's the first thing, Liz, is to remember there are no rules for the 2016 convention. In essence, the rules that we were all talking about are the rules for the last convention, and those rules have essentially expired. So the Rules Committee has to come up with a whole new set of rules for 2016. Here's something else that's interesting. If this gets as interesting and as raucous as some of us fear it might, that Rules Committee can be pulled back into session at any time during the convention. There's no limit on it changing the rules even after the convention has started. Now, that would probably cause a lot of heartburn and controversy, but the Rules Committee is an incredibly powerful and important part of this convention.
So basically the rules are there are no rules up until this point. Matt, we're just about out of time. I want to quickly ask you, is Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan or somebody outside the primary, are they trying to be the nominee? Do you expect any of them to have their name thrown into the ring?
I think that Mitt Romney has been out there putting himself forward as a potential Cleveland candidate, someone who would be airdropped into the process. He hasn't said it explicitly, but he's had such a high level of media exposure. He has gone out there to aggressively attack Donald Trump, and he hasn't said he's for any of these guys. Matter of fact, he's attacked Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, but he won't endorse John Kasich. I think he's trying to say we have no candidate in the race.
All right, Matt, you'll have to keep us updated as this unfolds, as it gets closer to July.